this is Mr. Brass, and I'm going to be making a short video where I'm going to be clearing up something that Ben Stanhope said that I viewed as disparaging ancient people and making them out to seem stupid. This is a common attitude I see amongst many but not all academics when dealing with ancient people. I'm not personally saying that Ben views ancient people this way, but someone who isn't read on Ben and this topic could interpret it that way. Also, to make it clear, I have no particular problem with Ben as a person, and in fact have wanted him on my show for a while, and that is still up for him to do. Let's take a look at what Ben said in specific.
So ancient Mesopotamians, ancient Jews, ancient Egyptians had no freaking idea what the brain did. The Egyptians, when they would mummify someone, they would just take it out and burn it and get rid of it. And then they would take other more important organs and preserve them in canopic jars because they're going to need those organs in the afterlife.
Now that is out of the way, let me clear some things up. This may have been an acceptable view prior to the 1930s, but not really so much now with the Edwin Smith papyrus. To make a long story short, an archaeologist in 1862 named Edwin Smith bought a papyrus in Luxor twice, one with the bolt of the papyrus and another a patched up dummy papyrus, which he was able to use fragments from that to add to the first. Supposedly the first came from an Egyptian coffin, and Edwin knew this was a medicinal papyrus. He didn't do anything with it, and nothing came of it really until his daughter donated it to the New York Historical Society, and where nearly a decade and a half later, Egyptologist James Breasted translated the document. It took off in the 1930s, and medical historians revised their history books to include that the Greeks weren't the first to talk about the brain. The papyrus showed that Egyptians recognized that the central nervous system and it being damaged can have a lot of effects far from the injury, like with problems with eye-hand coordination and paralyzed limbs. We can tell that the brain was recognized as having some importance, as the Narmer Palit shows a king smiting an enemy by disrupting the structure of the brain. Decapitations were also depicted as destroying the brain's control of life. The Edwin Smith papyrus shows doctors carefully detailing and promising to do their best to treat the damage. Cases 6 and 20 show that the Egyptians didn't view the brain as just, say, a wad of snot. Case 20 in specific shows a penetrating wound behind the eyes, and as neuroanesthesiast Rampil points out, it is a wonderful example of brain function known to the Egyptians. It seems sort of obvious that people who have fought in countless wars would know about combat injuries and know that the fastest way to incapacitate an enemy was by going for their head, i.e. their brain. Doctors back then would do trepanation in order to treat brain problems, so they were aware that the brain had functions and that it wasn't just useless per se. Now, why are we so predisposed to thinking ancient people like the Egyptians viewed the brain as useless? Well, it goes back to Herodotus, who described funerary practices where the brain was allegedly treated like useless, disposable waste. This, however, was a failure on his part to realize that it was more about improving the odds of quality mummification and not about viewing the brain in a bad and or useless way. The point of mummification was to preserve the body in a recognizable form so that the spirit after death could return to it, and thus allowing decay of corpse into the skeleton was a failure that could impact someone's internal life. Removing the brain was a good means to prevent decay and preserve the face so that it could be recognizable. The brain's high water content and spherical shape allowed for accelerated decomposition. Also, it should be noted that to remove the brain intact back then would risk ruining the face of the person, which would defeat the purpose of the entire procedure. Also, it should be noted that by the time most embalmers would get the body, the brain would just be a pool of goo, as the digestive enzymes would do that. All the embalmers would have to do is puncture the skull and drain the brain out of the open. Leaving the brain in place would actually risk the preservation of the face, as the water could leak through the skull. It should also be noted that the brain wasn't always taken out. Thutmosis II and III show that the face and brain was often been preserved, and barbers back then would just weigh the options there before they did it. Well, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.